Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Kalicube Tuesdays. I'm Jason Barnard, and I'm here with Mitch Duckler, who's going to be talking about best practices for activating brand purpose. I'm really curious to know what brand purpose actually means, and also why we should have one, what we can do to get one, and how it will help us. But before that, I'll sing my song. A quick hello, and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Mitch Duckler. Welcome.
Welcome. I think that's the most unique intro I've ever had.
Brilliant. It was to save time initially of actually putting the stinger at the beginning, and now it's just a lot of fun. And I've done 350 episodes, intro and outro, so it's everyday occurrence for me. But it's lovely to meet you. Great to have you on board because this topic is something I know nothing about, and I kind of think, well, we don't need a purpose, and you're probably going to explain that we do, and then you will explain how we use it, how we might misuse it, and what we should do next. But before that, we always talk about branded search, and this is the search result for your name. And that's a beautiful knowledge panel. It comes from Google Books because you've written a book, as we shall see in a moment. And it's the first time I've seen a picture with two people, top left. Usually Google goes for one person. Who's that person behind you?
Oh, he's a partner of mine that I've known for several decades. We work very closely together. His name
Right.
is Michael Million.
Michael Millian, what a great name for an entrepreneur.
It is.
This, I'm sure he hears that all the time. I'm sure that's not original. But what I like here as well is that we have the knowledge panel cards at the top, and those indicate that your digital footprint is relatively clean, and Google can get a good grip on your YouTube channel, your LinkedIn profile, and other information about you, and can therefore show that interesting information and promote you. And when I look at that, it seems to me you're an important, notable, credible, authoritative person. And that is what the great search result for a person's name is all about, especially in business. Do you like that? Did you work in any way to get that?
Um, if I did, it wasn't as intentional as it probably should have been, but it's good to hear nonetheless.
Brilliant. Yeah, and
I,
I
I
think
wish
that's the
I
point.
wish I could take credit for it and say it was a
Yeah.
brilliant foresight, but it wasn't.
Well, I think that's kind of the point is sometimes Google will understand and it will show this wonderful result, but it isn't intentional and it isn't controlled. And I think that's where the key is that we need to control what Google shows about us. And in this case, with good luck, you've had a great result. And what we do with our newsletter here, and I'll just introduce that, is help people to understand how they can educate Google. Because when you educate Google, it will show what you want when somebody Googles your name. And that's hugely powerful in business because it will drive leads, it will drive conversions, it will drive partnerships, it will drive hires if you've got a bigger company. Being the face of your business, having a great brand SERP knowledge panel like that is hugely important. But we wanted to talk about the best practices for activating brand purpose. And you've written a book about that, which I can show now. The Future Ready Brand. So this is the book that we saw in the knowledge panel, The Future Ready Brand by Mitch Duckler. And we're going to be talking exactly about that, the best practices for activating brand purpose. Now, I'm super interested. What do you mean by brand purpose? Question number one.
So purpose is a concept that actually isn't all that new in the business world. I'd say it's probably about for the past 15 or 20 years, it's really been a very topical issue. And I think it started with, or certainly became very mainstream with Simon Sinek's start with why concept. And his whole notion is that people don't buy what you do or what you make; they buy why you do it, right? And that purpose is really essential to success in business. And um, I've taken that one step further to talk about what role does purpose have specifically in marketing and in building your brand. So there are
Right.
very many, yeah, there are very many purpose-driven brands that whether it's a cause or another issue, it's something that they stand for, and it's very very important, especially to Gen Y and Gen Z.
Well, my immediate question there is the purpose of a brand or a company is to make money for the shareholders. And that's fundamentally what brands are about. And so Apple or Google, who say, well, we have a purpose, is them trying to look like they're doing something and not them actually doing something. They're still trying to make money for the shareholders. Is that a misunderstanding on my part, or are companies trying to cheat?
No, it's certainly, businesses are around and in business to make money, right? And we can't deny that. But what
Right.
has become evident, and there's been quite a bit of talk about this in the journals and so forth, is this notion of the triple bottom line. So
Hmm.
yes, profit is very important, right? And it always will be. But profit isn't the only thing that matters in terms of your bottom line. There's also people, right, and planet.
Right.
And it's really, you need to hit on all three of those. Certainly, you need to be profitable to stay in business and remain relevant and be competitive. But you also have to pay attention to people and to the planet as well. And that's really what has driven a lot of purpose branding.
But then if you look at a company like Exxon or Total, they have no concern for the planet at all and very little concern for people. They're just going for the money. That's not a problem for them because they're so big. Do we have to have a purpose? Do we have to follow the
No,
triple?
no, not at all. It's
Ah,
not mandatory. It's
thank you. Ooh,
yeah. Companies have done it but by and large, companies that are purpose driven tend to be more successful in the long run. They do tend to
right.
have higher profitability, um, and longevity and so forth. So no, it's certainly not. It's not to say that if you don't have a purpose, if you don't live by it, you're doomed. But those
Yeah.
that do have been shown to do better over the long run.
And a company like Exxon or Marlboro or Philip Morris are constantly fighting to keep the laws in their favor because they know that they're creating a certain number of problems for humanity and their purpose is not going to drive them forwards. But let's move back to the world where we do have a purpose. If, as a company, I feel that I can look after my bottom line whilst also looking after people and having a purpose for my brand, which is positive for humanity, uh, what would that be? Where do I find it?
Well, first and foremost, it can't be manufactured. It needs to
Ah,
be, yeah, it needs to be something that is genuine. You can't just make it up or decide that you want to do some research and find a noble purpose and then and then embrace it, right? It is something that has to be true to your company's DNA, right? Something that you truly do believe in and stand behind. And to your earlier point, it's not just making money, right, or increasing
right.
shareholder profit. It has to be something that kind of inspires you, and is the reason why you're motivated to get up in the morning and go to work and do what you do. So it's not as simple as what should our purpose be. It really is a very introspective exercise to determine what is it that motivates you, right, beyond just making profit.
Right. So my first guess at Calicube's purpose would be our purpose is to help humanity manage, or each member of humanity to manage their personal or corporate brand representation online.
Yeah.
We're here to help people take control, self-determination. Would that be a good approach?
Well, why is that important to you, or what is the benefit of that? I think I would just ask that question.
Well, but specifically right now, in a world of AI search and assistive engines such as
Hmm.
ChatGPT, Google, Bing, Perplexity, where these machines are now having conversations with human beings, and in order to try to help the human beings to get to the solution to their problem, we're trying to get, as business people or people, we're going to get involved in these conversations indirectly, i.e., the machines will start talking about us to their users with or without our permission. And so it's vitally important that when those machines talk about us or exchange about us with their users, that we have some level of control what those machines are saying.
Okay, and why? So why is that important, right? So what does that enable your stakeholders to do, or how does it improve their life?
Being misrepresented to your audience through the interface of a machine, it can be incredibly problematic.
Okay.
Reputation management would be a great example of that.
Yeah.
But also being able to promote yourself to the right audience. And if you think about these machines, ChatGPT, Bing, Google, as the biggest influences in the world, so any influencer on TikTok or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter is tiny in comparison to Google or ChatGPT or Bing, who are having a conversation and are likely to recommend you, introduce you to the conversation. You want to be part of the conversation between the biggest influencers in the world and their audience.
Right. Yeah. So and where I'm going with this, you can see, is it is kind of the question of so what, right? And it does try,
Yeah.
purpose does try to get to a bigger order. So it could be, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it could be something like, your purpose is to, help people, establish and maintain their identity, or,
Mm.
improve and enhance their identity in an increasingly digital world, or something like that. It goes beyond what you do, right? And
Okay.
the reason why you do it, and the higher order benefit for them. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not just me saying, "Oh, I want to help humanity or help people because I'm a nice guy." It's that there has to be some value for the people, or the people for whom I'm proposing a purpose.
Yes, yeah, and that is one of the core tenets of purpose branding, is that it needs to also be at least indirectly, if not directly, related to what you do and how you make money, right? And how, so it has to be related to your business in some way, shape, or form, which in your
Oh,
case it
right.
certainly is.
Yeah. Sorry. So I went immediately for what is my business and what good does it do to the planet or to the world, and that's actually not necessarily the point. It could be that my team is in the Philippines, and part of my purpose could be helping families in the Philippines.
Yeah, yeah, it could be. I mean, it could
Okay.
very well be. Yeah,
And
yeah.
the
It's
the the point you're making as well is whatever purpose I choose, it has to be a core value, and we have to walk the walk. If we don't walk the walk, we'll get caught out, and that happens a lot, if I understand correctly.
Exactly. There's, yeah, it's a disingenuous purpose is probably worse than no purpose at all, right? So, um, yeah. So like I said, it is very important that it is very true. It's very genuine and authentic. Part of your DNA. A good purpose also serves as almost a filter or a screen for decision making, right?
Hmm, okay.
When you're making key business decisions, you can ask yourself, hey, is this consistent with our purpose, with why we do what we're doing? Yes or no? Or, and if so, how?
Right. Okay. And so you also said decision making, and you were saying product or service development can also be affected by the purpose.
Yeah, very, very much so, right? So the products that you choose to launch or not launch, or the markets you choose to enter or not enter, or the segments you choose to serve or not serve, um, can be influenced by your purpose. Now, not everything is going to relate to your purpose, right? But I think at a minimum, you'd want to understand, hey, is this consistent with our purpose? Is this consistent with why we do what we do? Or asked another way, is it inconsistent, right? Does it fight our
Hmm.
purpose? Is another way to look at it.
And so what do I need to do in order to, and when you're talking about activating brand purpose, so if I've identified my brand purpose and I want to position my brand and communicate around or with that brand purpose included in my communication, what do I actually need to do?
Well, there's a few different things to think about, and to sort out here. First of all, what I would say is that most companies have a CSR, right? A corporate social responsibility platform. That doesn't mean
Mhm.
that they're purpose driven, right? And that's all well and good, right? It's great to have CSR, right? It doesn't make you necessarily purpose driven. Then there are companies that are purpose driven, as we're talking about, right? But they don't necessarily define their brand, their corporate brand by that purpose, and that's okay too. Purpose brands are when you've really got all three, right? You have your business strategy, your corporate purpose, and then your brand is actually defined by that. And then it really becomes very consistent with or very similar to any other brand, right? And that you are activating your brand in a way that is consistent with its positioning. The only difference here is that in this case, your positioning is also your purpose. So all
Right.
of the same things, right? So whether it's through your advertising, your promotion, your digital marketing activation, it should be conducted or activated in a way that's very consistent with your positioning, which in this case is your purpose.
Right. So, can you give me an example of a brand that does this incredibly well that I will have heard of?
Yeah, I think one of the best examples of is Patagonia, right? Which is very much their purpose is all about saving the planet, and they they activate in a way. They had this is years ago, but I think it's one of the most salient examples. They actually ran a print ad with one of their jackets, outdoor jackets, and it said, don't buy this jacket. Right. So think
Mm.
about that. When do you see a company spend money on media, right? Saying don't buy this. And the whole thing is the whole concept is don't buy it for what it does, buy it because of why it does it. Right. It's it is all about sustainability and about being friendly to the earth,
Mm.
which is their cause and their belief, right? So they are activating their brand. They are actually, in this case, advertising it in a way that is very, very consistent and reinforcing of their brand purpose and their corporate purpose.
Right. Okay. And if we carry on with that example on social media, how do they communicate with that purpose in order to get the message across in a broader perspective than just an advertising campaign?
Same way, right? So they might be posting in a way that's talking about sustainability or climate change, circularity, things like that, right? They're doing their media, they're posting, their interaction is very consistent with that purpose. That doesn't mean necessarily that every single post is about their purpose, right? But
Right.
if you look through their social media feeds and their activity and what they're doing, right, you're going to see a lot of that purpose reflected in it.
Right. Okay.
Their content so they're developing content, right, around their purpose, educating the world, and then they're promoting that content around of that purpose in their social media activity.
I mean, it would also be possible to think that they're simply manipulating the public around something the public appreciates in order to make more money for the shareholders. And at the end of the day, the purpose isn't the point. Making money for the shareholders is the point.
There are some that might believe that, and again, I think that is when it comes down to authenticity. If you see them doing and acting in a way that is very consistent with that purpose, consistently over time, I think some of that skepticism goes away.
Yeah.
If it feels like it's just an advertising campaign, or as I said earlier, a CSR platform, um, it may come off as disingenuous.
Right. Yeah, I'm super tempted to ask you for some bad examples, but that's going to be not a good idea right now. What I would like to do is ask you for an example that's somewhere between saving the planet and me just wanting to be nice to people and help them with their branding online. Something kind of midway that most companies or any company could potentially aim for, because saving the planet is a big ask.
Right. Well, so what I would say is that there are, and this isn't my research. This is actually from HBR, from Harvard Business Review. They said that they believe purpose can come from three different sources, right? So a lot of purpose people associate with a cause, like
Hmm.
DE&I or ESG or so forth, right? But there's two other sources. One is competence, right? It's what you do, right, better than anybody else, and
Okay.
or your company culture is a third source. So, one example of the competence and that I bring out in the book is IBM. So, one of the things, their purpose, and it's very consistent with their brand positioning, is around making the world a smarter place. and they
Right.
do that through their technology, and especially through emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, right? So um,
Cool.
they so Smarter Planet, right, is something about, it's a competency, right, that they're making the world a more intelligent place through what they do better than anybody else.
Which is really delightful because they're making the world a more intelligent place with AI, and the AI then misrepresents people because it hasn't fully understood them. So we're up against IBM, helping people to fight back against IBM, who are making the world a more intelligent place, but not necessarily representing us correctly. So uh, IBM and Kalicube have completely polarized, or very similar competencies in some respects, but very polarized in what we're trying to do with it, or at least we're feeding into IBM's. I like that idea. It's just made me very happy. Thank you very much. What about
Yes.
the company culture?
Yeah, so culture is another, I think that's probably of the three, maybe the least common.
Mhm.
But it really relates to how a company likes to treat its people,
Mm.
um, and the environment that it wants to create, the type of people that it wants to attract and retain and inspire. Um, again, I think there are a few there, and there's a company in particular that I reference in the book. Mars is very much about building a culture. Mars, the confectionery
Mhm.
company, about building an environment that positively promotes um, and inspires people to be their best, right? And they feel like when you do that, when you create that kind of an environment, that you get the best results, right? Not just for the company, but for their consumers and for society in general, right? So
And
that's an example of one that's inspired by purpose. I'm sorry,
right,
by
okay.
culture.
And the point there is that the people who buy from Mars potentially would be inspired by the fact that they feel an affinity to the people who work at Mars.
Yeah, that it goes to go back to the beginning. Said why do I can you I think there in that case, it's they would recruit, right, and retain people that embrace that purpose, which I think is
Mm.
really critical for any, whether it's cause, culture, or competence. That's very important, is to make sure that you are attracting people to the company that embrace that purpose, and bring it to life. And again, that can be any one of those three, right? But in this case, in the case of Mars, let's say it is very much about the kind of environment that people want to be in, right, and to be a part of.
Right. So that company culture one is absolutely nothing to do with the clients. It's everything to do with the internal. So the people who buy from Mars is because they like the sweets. What the company, the purpose is trying to do is improve the workforce.
In that case, I would say yes, because, and again, I think, at least in my experience, and I don't, I wrote about this. It's one chapter out of 9 in my book. I don't claim to be an expert or foremost expert in purpose, but again, in my experience, it is the probably the least common of the three, and by far, in a way, the most common is a cause.
Right.
When you see people, or I'm sorry, when you see companies that are defined by and inspired by a purpose, more often than not, it is about a cause
Hmm.
that they believe deeply in, like the Patagonia, right? Or companies that are very embracive of inclusivity, right, and diversity and
Right.
inclusion, things like that. So um, that's, again, those are the more common examples, and
Okay.
I think
And
the
well, another question then is we could potentially have multiple purposes or purpose.
well, I suppose I think it might get a little diluted. and one thing I would say is, if that is the case, and I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't do that, but you certainly wouldn't want to position your brand around it, right? Because then,
Mm.
as I think we all know, brand positioning, in the marketing world, brand positioning needs to be singular, right? Very singularly focused. Um,
Right.
so you can't have multiple purposes, or you would have a very schizophrenic brand,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
if
Okay.
you're gonna have multiple purposes, I would not encourage you to position your brand around multiple ideas, right? That's just not a good practice.
Right. And what one thing you mentioned is to measure the results, and we can kind of move on to measuring the results. How do you do that?
Well, I personally don't, but again, in the book, I do refer to a lot of research, that it's longitudinal research that has shown, they've taken a look at how companies, like mostly publicly traded companies, have performed financially, and and dissected that by those that consider themselves and are considered by others to be purpose driven, and those who are not. And by and large, over time, the companies that have been driven by a purpose, right, that they identify with a purpose and claim to be driven by it, they do tend to outperform their counterparts that are not. So, I think it's, to say, what is the ROI on purpose? I don't know if it's that easy to do, right? Or if it's even possible. I don't think it's that
Mm.
simplistic. But
Right.
there is a lot of evidence, empirical evidence, that over time, those companies that are purpose driven tend to do very well. And again, it can't just it is about the three P's, right? And that first P is still profit. If you're not making money, if you don't have positive income, right, you're not going to be in business for very long. And no matter what your purpose is, it's going to be irrelevant. But
Right.
it's when all of those come together, right? It's when your purpose and profitability come together that you have something special.
Right. And would consumer and customer sentiment be a way that we could use, that something we could use as a KPI for this?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That is, certainly, companies that are purpose driven will want to do market research to understand and track, as you say, sentiment over time. So if they are all about inclusion, for example, to what extent, when you do market research, are consumers playing that back, that they see you as a company that embraces inclusiveness, right, or diversity. Um, and importantly, more so than certainly your key competitors, or even companies in general, right? If you're going to be defined by that purpose, and define your brand by it, especially, you're going to want to be able to see that in research, that consumers are giving you credit, that this is not just something you're claiming,
Mhm.
but that you're actually being recognized for.
Right. I mean, I suppose purpose is something emotional by definition, at which point, when that
It is.
resonates with your audience, your customers, or your workforce, that sentiment comes back to you, hopefully amplified, at which point you have a KPI. And if you don't have a purpose, then you're a faceless corporate block. And there's very little sentiment that will come bouncing back at you joyfully from your audience or your customers. Thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. We have one last question, which is this one. How does brand purpose help with branded search? You have 1 minute, Mitch.
Well, again, I think the answer to that is, if you have your brand purpose defined as your brand positioning, it is one way that you can associate your purpose with your positioning, right? And it's just a way for you to own something in your name, in your brand, at a much higher level, right? Um, attaching your brand purpose to your brand can be very helpful from a search perspective.
Right. Yeah. And of course, if you've successfully attached your purpose to your brand, when somebody Googles your name, or they look in ChatGPT, or they search on Bing, that purpose will be reflected right back at them, including, I would imagine, with a well managed purpose driven strategy, the sentiment that you've managed to generate would also be reflected back in that brand SERP or the branded searches. Thank you so much, Mitch.
Absolutely.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you everyone for watching. We're now going to pass the baton to Jez Schultz next week, mastering SEO strategy in Google's Gemini era. That's terribly, terribly geeky. And for people who don't know Gemini, it's Google's equivalent of ChatGPT. So far, maybe not so good. And maybe Jez will help us to understand how we can help make it better from the outside. Please, could you pass the baton, Mitch?
I will pass the baton to Jess, and I look forward to hearing what you say on that topic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next week. A quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be with you.
Kalicube. It's all about your brand SERP.